Before we begin, this story contains descriptions of death in extreme cold, disturbing physical injuries, and details about the condition of recovered bodies. If that's something you need to step away from, we understand. Take care of yourself first. February 26, 1959. A search team on skis crests a ridge on the eastern slope of Kholat-Syakhl, a mountain in the northern Urals, whose name, in the Mansi language, translates to Dead Mountain. Below them, half buried in snow, is a tent. It's been slashed open from the inside. Shoes, warm clothing, and provisions are still inside. But the 9 people who slept here are gone. 8 or 9 sets of footprints lead away from the tent into the darkness, some barefoot, some in socks, one in a single shoe, walking in orderly formation for 500 meters before they vanish. None of them survived. Every story in here actually happened. That's the part that should scare you. This is the Unlit Room. New stories every week. Tonight, 9 hikers, 1 mountain, and a question that took 60 years to answer, if it ever was. The Ural Mountains run like a spine down the border between Europe and Asia. 2,500 kilometers of forest and tundra, and not much else. In January 1959, a group of 10 students and recent graduates from the Ural Polytechnical Institute in Sverdlovsk, now Yekaterinburg, set out on a ski trek through the northern Urals. Their destination was Otorten, a peak about 10 kilometers north of where they would die. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, 23 years old, an engineering student and experienced grade D2 hiker applying for grade 3 certification, the highest rating in the Soviet system. There were 10 of them when they started. One, Yuri Yudin, turned back on the second day with joint pain. He would be the only one to survive. Years later, Yudin would describe hugging his friend Igor goodbye on the trail, not knowing it was the last time he would see any of them alive. The remaining 9 pushed north. They kept a group diary and took photographs. The last entry is dated February 1st. The last photographs show them setting up camp on the slope of Kholat-Syakhl in fading light, digging into the snow to level a platform for the tent. They look tired but calm. Normal. Sometime that night, something happened. We don't know what. We don't know when. What we know is this: the 9 hikers cut through the wall of their tent with knives, not the door, the wall, and climbed out into temperatures estimated at minus 40 degrees Celsius. They were wearing what they'd been sleeping in: underwear, socks. One person had a single boot. They left behind insulated jackets, boots, food, an axe, and a stove. And then they walked, calmly, based on the footprint evidence, 500 meters down the slope toward the tree line, in orderly formation, before the tracks disappeared under fresh snowfall. It's worth pausing here to understand what minus 40 means. At that temperature, exposed skin begins to suffer frostbite in under 10 minutes. Without insulation, the body's core temperature drops fast. Cognitive function degrades, decision-making collapses. And yet the footprints suggest an orderly walk, not a panicked run. Micro cliffhanger 1. Whatever drove them out of that tent was more frightening than the cold, and the cold would kill most of them within hours. The search began on February 20th, when the group failed to send a telegram from the endpoint of their route. Volunteers, fellow hikers, students, soldiers, fanned out across the mountain. On February 26th, they found the tent. The scene made no sense. The tent had been pitched correctly, secured with ropes and ski poles. But the fabric was slashed from inside. Long, deliberate cuts, the kind you make when you need to get out fast and the door isn't an option. Inside, everything the hikers needed to survive. Outside, footprints leading into the dark. The first 2 bodies were found on February 27th at the edge of the tree line, about 1.5 kilometers from the tent. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko lay near the remains of a small fire beneath a large cedar tree. They were in their underwear. Their hands were torn and bloody. Branches on the cedar had been snapped off up to 5 meters high, as if they had climbed the tree desperately. Perhaps to see the tent. Perhaps to see whatever had made them leave it. Between the cedar and the tent, over the next few days, searchers found 3 more bodies. Igor Dyatlov himself, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin, all positioned along a line between the tree and the tent, as though they had tried to walk back. Dyatlov was found clutching a branch. Kolmogorova's hands were frozen in a position that suggested she had been climbing uphill through deep snow. Slobodin had a small fracture in his skull, but the medical examiner ruled he could have walked and functioned for hours after receiving it. All 5 died of hypothermia. 5 bodies, 5 deaths from cold, terrible but explainable. A group panics, flees their shelter, and dies of exposure. It happens. Rarely to hikers this experienced, but it happens. If the story ended here, it might have stayed a regional tragedy. It didn't end here. Micro cliffhanger 2, the other 4 weren't found until May. And what the search team found in that ravine would ensure the Dyatlov Pass case would never be closed. Not really. On May 4, 1959, searchers probing the snow near the tree line discovered a makeshift shelter in a ravine, about 75 meters from the cedar tree. Under 4 meters of snow, they found the remaining 4 hikers: Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, and Semyon Zolotaryov. These 4 were better dressed than the others, some wearing clothing that appeared to have been cut from the bodies of those who died first. This suggested they had survived longer, long enough to try to save themselves, but their injuries were not from the cold. Dubinina had massive chest trauma. Her ribs were crushed with a force the medical examiner compared to a car crash. Zolotaryov had the same. Bilateral rib fractures severe enough to be fatal. Thibault Brignol had a catastrophic skull fracture. And yet there were no external wounds on any of them. No bruises, no marks on the skin. The force that killed them came from inside the body outward, or from something that compressed the chest without breaking the skin. And then there was the soft tissue. Lyudmila Dubinina was found face down in a running stream in the ravine. Her tongue was missing, her eyes were missing. Part of her lips and a fragment of skull bone were gone. Zolotaryov's eyes were also missing. Kolevatov's eyebrows were absent. The Soviet investigation noted one more detail. Some of the clothing recovered from the ravine tested positive for radioactive contamination, specifically beta-emitting isotopes on the outer layers. This was never explained. By this point, the evidence had split into 2 stories that didn't fit together. 5 people dead from hypothermia, tragic but comprehensible. 4 people with catastrophic internal injuries and missing soft tissue. In the same incident, on the same night, on the same mountain. The theories began almost immediately, and they've never stopped. The official Soviet investigation, completed in May 1959, concluded that all 9 hikers died as a result of, and this is a direct quote, a compelling natural force which they were not able to overcome. The case was classified and closed. Some researchers pointed to military testing. Witnesses in nearby settlements reported strange orange lights in the sky around the time of the incident. The radioactive clothing has never been explained. Was the Soviet military testing ordnance, chemical, nuclear or otherwise, in the northern Urals that winter? No military records confirm it. But then they wouldn't. In 2013, American author and filmmaker Donnie Eichar proposed infrasound, a phenomenon called a Kármán vortex, where wind flowing around a dome-shaped mountain can produce low-frequency sound waves below the range of human hearing. According to Eichar, these sound waves can trigger panic, nausea, and irrational behavior. It would explain the flight from the tent, but it cannot explain crushed ribs. And then, in 2020, the Russian government reopened the case for the first time in 60 years. Their conclusion: avalanche. Specifically, a delayed slab avalanche, a phenomenon where a rigid plate of wind-packed snow fractures and slides, sometimes hours after the conditions that created it. In 2021, a study led by researchers at EPFL in Switzerland and ETH Zurich modeled the slope conditions that night and concluded that a small slab avalanche, too small to bury the tent, but heavy and fast enough to cause blunt force trauma, was consistent with the injuries to the 4 in the ravine and with the group's panicked exit from the tent. Both the mundane and the extraordinary explanations account for parts of the evidence. Neither accounts for all of it. Here is the detail that makes the simple answer harder to accept, and the conspiratorial answer unnecessary. Lyudmila Dubinina was found face down in a running stream. The water had been flowing over her body for nearly 3 months. The missing tongue, the missing eyes, the absent lips. These are consistent, precisely, specifically consistent with the natural decomposition of soft tissue in running water. Skin, eyes, and tongue are the first to go. There was no blood on her face because there was no blood left. The water had washed it away over weeks. The chest injuries match the compression profile of a slab avalanche. The skull fracture matches a falling block of consolidated snow. The radioactive clothing has a possible, though unconfirmed, explanation. 2 of the hikers had previously worked at nuclear facilities, and low-level contamination of outer garments was not uncommon for workers in the Soviet nuclear program. The most terrifying explanation may be the most ordinary one. A small avalanche hit the tent in the dark. The hikers panicked, cut their way out, fled into the cold without their gear, and died, some from the initial impact, most from the cold, and the last 4 from a combination of injuries and exposure in a ravine where running water would later erase the evidence. But the Soviet government classified the case for decades. And that single decision to hide the simple answer guaranteed that the simple answer would never be believed. 9 people left for a mountain and didn't come back. That is the core of this story, and it's the part that resists all the theories and counter-theories and classification stamps. Igor Dyatlov was 23. Lyudmila Dubinina was 20. Yuri Doroshenko was 21. They were students with exams to study for and careers ahead of them. They went hiking because they loved hiking, and something happened on that mountain that took all of them. Maybe it was snow, maybe it was something else entirely. What we know for certain is that the mountain's name, Dead Mountain, in a language spoken by people who had lived there for centuries, was not a warning that anyone heeded. The pass where they died was officially renamed Dyatlov Pass. It still carries that name today. More stories like this every week. Subscribe if you want the next one to find you. Follow the Unlit Room wherever you listen. Tell a friend who can't sleep. Subscribers hear this one ad-free, plus a bonus ending with the full list of competing theories that didn't make the main episode. Full story on the main channel. Follow if you're wide awake. That was the Unlit Room. See you in the dark.